Yep, we
Yeah, it
got
looks
it.
like it. And then I
Yeah.
do just want to say thank you for recognizing the importance of this recording and working with us through these technological experiences.
Well, if it's that important, and I'm sure it is, then we better make sure we get this recorded because we don't want to do it again. The second time through is never as good, you know. So,
Right.
so how can I help you? What are you guys
All right.
up
Well,
to?
so I'm just a guy who ended up being a old rural lawmaker here in Iowa, and a lot of exciting discussions. I guess just from my personal experience, I mean, maybe 10 years ago when I moved to Southeast Iowa, some young people came and really recommended I try a healthy dose of what they called psilocybin. And I ended up having what could, I would consider a mystical experience, or certainly had some magic to it where I perceived things differently. Thankfully, at that time, I had accompaniment that told me, we sat down and we set an intention and we kind of stated some things that we wanted to get out of the experience. I was a young man. I had a lot of insecurity. And then through that, from, swimming across the lake, being in nature, this kind of idea of finding your place among nature, came into my experience. And that just allowed me to, I believe, mature as a human being, to get out of my own way, to realize that there is a larger network of supportive intelligence or supportive nature that, wants me to succeed, or that I have a room to flourish as just my occupying this current space and time. I don't know if that all came from that first mushroom experience, but it certainly, I would say it was a pivotal point in my life as a young man. And now here I am 10 years later, and I'm representing these people in the Iowa State House. And my goal is to have a very open and honest discussion about, I guess, the state of medicine, the state of our mental emotional health. And yeah, so that's where I'm coming from. And so I think where you can really help out is explaining, just what's really going on. And I know you have a many decades of experience, perhaps some background on how we got to this point. I know at some point we'd love to go into just the scientific biological mechanisms, what happens to me on my brain when I have, half a gram of dried mushrooms. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at. We're having a subcommittee hearing on this topic next week. And so we're hoping to get as many clips to just inform the public on how interesting these topics are, and then certainly our fellow lawmakers and policymakers for the state of Iowa. Okay,
sounds good. You got that far on half a gram?
No, I don't know. I didn't have a sophisticated measuring device, but
okay.
Probably that first time.
Okay, I was going to say, you must have been eating some potent shrooms there if you got there on half a gram. It's possible. I mean, there are, but you were probably eating cubensis, right? The cultivated kind, the so-called, well, they're called various things, sometimes the golden teachers or whatever, but psilocybe cubensis, the big, robust psilocybin mushrooms are easy, easiest to cultivate. That's mostly what people cultivate. So, it sounds like you got the memo when you did it. You pretty much got
a little
the
bit
memo.
late. Well, so that would have been in 2011. 30 years after I believe you published that initial manuscript. So yeah, maybe you could speak to that in terms of what captivated your attention. And I know you have a lot of research in this area. Perhaps you could just share some of the most important things you found when studying psilocybin in particular.
Okay, well, yeah, psychedelics have been important in my life, obviously. Initially, I was just, part of the counterculture, and I was fascinated with these things, with psychedelics in general, and then didn't really, there was no, back in the late 60s, early 70s, there was no psilocybin around, no psilocybin mushrooms, and so I didn't really get exposure to it till I went to South America in 1971. And that was my first encounter with psilocybin. And psilocybin has been, I basically, I would not call myself a psychonaut, if by a psychonaut you mean somebody who will try everything they can get their hands on just to put a point on the map. I'm not really into that. I've done my share of that, but I basically think it's better to work with one or two of these plant allies, if you want to think of them that way. Uh, and for me, it's been ayahuasca and mushrooms. You know, mushrooms initially, later in life, ayahuasca, and now kind of, you know, going back to mushrooms. Well, I don't abandon either one of these things. They've both been tremendously meaningful to me as learning tools. You know, teaching tools to, you know, try to become a better person, you know, and very often the message that I get when I take them, and many people get, is the perceptions about nature, you know, and how out of sync we are with nature. And I think that's a good deal of our problem, collectively and individually, you know, that we are estranged from nature. And mushrooms and ayahuasca can potentially, for many people, it helps refocus, you know, one's attention on nature, and realize that you know, that we're out of harmony with nature, and because of that we're seeing the consequences, you know, on the planetary level in terms of climate change and all that, as well as the you know, what you might call the mental health crisis. uh, and uh, and so it's interesting now, you know, these substances, as you know, were vilified and prohibited, and in most places still are, you know, but science is beginning to wake up to their value therapeutically. And so it looks like the regulatory framework is going to have to change. You know, now there's big venture capital involved and all these startup companies and so on. And I'm on several advisory boards to some of these companies, and my message to them is kind of, well, you know, we all understand that these things are great, and they have great potential and all that, but in the absence of a regulatory shift, you got to, you know, you can't market these things, you can't, and you can't even offer psychedelic therapy, which is where I think the, you know, the real revenue model, if people want to make money, it's not selling the substances, it's providing the support services that you have to provide to help people get a really, have a really good outcome. And so if psychedelics are going to be accepted into medicine, into mainstream medicine, that's going to have to shift the economic model considerably. And so that's the first challenge. You know, you can't really integrate psychedelic therapies into psychiatric medicine the way it's done now, because it requires intense therapeutic support, you know, and the usual model these days, you've got depression, you've got some problem, you go to a doctor. If you're lucky, you get 10 minutes with that doctor, and you walk out with a prescription, usually for an SSRI or something like that. And you take that and you feel kind of better, but it doesn't really solve the problem. It does not get to the root of the problem. It's a band-aid. It papers it over. Psychedelics can actually give you insights into what your issues are, be it depression, anxiety, trauma, uh, addictions, all of these things. Uh, the psychedelics give you an opportunity to step outside your reference frame a little bit, step outside your own box, look at your situation from that perspective, and that in some ways gives you more power over it. It gives you uh, you know, the chance to not be owned by it. You know, you can turn
So,
the
so Dennis,
tables,
I
and
think
you
that's,
can own the condition, you can own your problem and have insights to it, and eventually lead to resolution rather than just a Band-Aid solution.
So I guess that's a big picture revolution in terms of these therapies and our approach to psychiatric disorders. And Shannon, feel free to jump in at any time here, but I guess this would be maybe a good time to go into, well, I guess one, I know we've had this term ethnopharmacology and just your research, but I guess what I think people or lawmakers really want to know, what happens in the human brain when, I take that gram of dried mushrooms? What happens in my brain when I take, or my whole entire body for that? But yeah, what's actually happening? What are the biological mechanisms that are providing this psychiatric revolution?
Okay, well, now's my cue to say I'm just a simple ethnobotanist. I'm not I'm not a neuroscientist,
Okay.
but I've dabbled in neuroscience and I understand how it works. There are many people more expert than I am that you can talk to. But basically, here's the thing. One of the leading researchers in this field is a Brit, Robin Carhart Harris. I think he's at King's College London, and he's one of the leaders in the development of therapy, primarily involving psilocybin, but developing these therapeutic protocols. And he talks about the default mode network. Have you heard that term?
Yes.
Yeah, the default mode network is where we are right now. The default mode network is kind of this program that you create, that your brain creates for yourself, that you might call normal consciousness, just day-to-day consciousness. And it's made up partly of your immediate experience that you get through your senses, your experience of just being, sitting here, related to memories and associations in the that exist, and also related to future projections. So what the default mode network is a kind of model of reality that your brain creates for itself that makes it comprehensible. Because and a lot of what the default mode network does is keep information out. It has as much of a exclusion function as anything else, because if everything in your senses and from other sources were allowed in all the time, it would just be a blooming, buzzing confusion, and you'd think you were nuts, and you'd be close to right. So the default mode network is something that has evolved in us big brain primates so that we can make sense of the world, and it's a model. I sometimes call it the reality hallucination. The point is, it's not reality. It's a model of reality, and it's convenient, but it can also it can foster habits and harmful behaviors and that sort of thing. It's like a computer. It gets kludged up sometimes. It doesn't work as smoothly as it should, and so what psychedelics do is, one way of looking at what they do in the brain is they temporarily disable this default mode network, and that's why they're scary in some ways, because you have to be prepared to trust yourself enough to let go, and it's very important that you do that under the right circumstances, right? The psychedelic people always talk about set and setting, and also the right kind of therapeutic support, which usually involve, it doesn't have to be a psychiatrist, because these things are also done in traditional contexts where you have a curandero or someone like that who fulfills the same function. But you need somebody who is experienced, who can help support you, not necessarily tell you where you're supposed to be, but kind of tune into where you're at as you have this experience, and provide the support that you might need if things get a little rough. And so this disabling of the default mode network amounts to what I was talking about before. You get to step out of your reference frame temporarily, and you do that by destroying your reference frame temporarily. But and then you look at things from a different perspective, and you realize, a lot of the cliche realizations in some ways that people talk about, the mystical experience, we are all one, and there is no separation between people and nature and all that. I mean, these are the sort of the core of the mystical experience that can lead to a shift in attitude. A lot of it has to do, I think, with realizing that you're disabling your ego, and you're not you're getting away from that temporarily, and then you still have a self, but you realize how much the self is embedded in sort of the community of all selves, so you can step away from this reference frame by temporarily disabling it, and you can look at your existential situation, your neuroses, your problems, your depression, whatever, from a different perspective. And in some ways, you can defuse it. You can see how habit and ingrained behavior sort of sabotage a person, and it keeps them from making a fresh start every time. So these psychedelics are very potent because they just sweep all of that away temporarily, and it's sort of like the naked self without all this armor suddenly gets to confront themselves in the context of this mystery of being that we all inhabit it, but all the time, but we're not aware of it all the time. And the default mode network is it's very resilient, and another way of saying it is, the brain, like any biological system, but the brain operates on feedback loops and equilibrium. It tends to maintain equilibrium. So you can demolish this default mode network and get the insights from it, but it's going to reconstitute. It's going to fall back together after a few hours, and you're not going to die. You're not going to go crazy. You may be a changed person.
You feel like you are.
Be a better.
Can I interject here?
Yeah.
So I guess one of the big complaints or criticisms of, say, my bill to completely decriminalize psilocybin is that, okay, is it potential for someone to go crazy or not get reconnected again, or not have their default model of reality restored after a very intense, in your experience, have you seen anyone getting their brain permanently scrambled in a way that, really upset people?
It can happen. It's very rare, it's very rare that people lose it completely and don't recover. This is the reason why you need this set and setting and the therapy.
And the support too is why.
And post session as well is yeah, exactly. You need integration. That's the whole thing. The way you have to structure these experiences, the way they do it in the clinical studies, there's a lot of preparation, a lot of talking to the therapist before you ever take any medicine, so that what to expect. They know you're very clear about why you're doing this. I'm not talking about recreational use. That's a whole other matter. And then have the therapist support you during the session. And it may, they may be present. They may not seem to be doing much. Sometimes they have to actively intervene, but sometimes they're just kind of there providing a support. And that can be very reassuring to someone who's going through these intense experiences. And then after the session, then comes the integration. And that's how you essentially, interiorize the lessons that you've learned. You interiorize what you've learned, and leads to long-term positive benefits, and you may you may think it's not doing much, but this plays out over time, and you realize, yeah, it actually changed me. I'm a happier, more positive person, so the therapeutic effects can be long term, and that's important about about the therapeutic setting. That is what facilitates that, whether it's a well-structured kind of shamanic traditional kind of ceremony, or whether it's a psychiatrically embedded kind of thing. I mean, even the psychiatrists realize now that you get the best results. I mean, nobody wants to go to a hospital and take psilocybin in a hospital room. I mean, I can't imagine a horror trip, But so even the
The
psychiatrists,
lighting alone.
Yeah.
they take they take care to set up nice spaces. They're like living rooms, or they're nice spaces with lots of art and music and all that stuff to make it easier for people. But that's the new therapeutic paradigm that has to be emerge and be accepted if these things are going to be used in medicine.
Well, I think that's where we're at. We're hopefully holding space for the next generation of healers to build on your work and really, hold space for those who are able to make a conscious choice to the difficult healing journey. Or it isn't even all that difficult sometimes, but just taking a step forward to explore the unknown, making sure that we're holding space to give people a chance to pursue that. I guess at this time, because I know time is limited, which direction did you want to take the conversation, or is there anything you're?
I mean, I'm just loving everything that you're saying. To kind of explain it too is how I explain it. I don't know if this is right, so you give me some feedback since I don't get to often speak to.
Okay. Sure.
So I explain it like you're kind of rebooting your operating system.
Reboot, very important. I meant to say
Yes.
that. This is you probably stole that from me. I mean, although you're not stealing it because it's obvious. That's what's going on. I think more than we realize, disabling this default mode network and then letting it fall apart and then letting it fall back together and reconstitute, which it will do in 99.99% of the cases. And when it does that, just like rebooting your computer, it'll work better. You get a lot of kludge out of it, and it's actually more efficient. And on the neurological level, I don't know how far the analogy holds, but I do think that it is like rebooting. And on the neurological level, what's happening is, I think it's a serotonin flush, essentially. Serotonin is the neurotransmitter that these things work on. And it's like flooding your system with serotonin is kind of like putting, STP in your automobile or something. Your engine is just going to run better after you get this reset. But then inevitably things will, we go through life, we experience various kinds of trauma and challenges and so on, just as a process of living. So occasionally, every few months, or infrequently anyway, it's good to go back to the well, and take another drink and remind yourself so that you don't forget the insights. Not everybody has to do that. I mean, this is the thing. Some people, once or twice in a lifetime is plenty, and this is one reason why when we look at the commercialization of psychedelic therapy, you can't make the money selling drugs, I mean, because the amount is just small. You make the money providing the support for the therapies. The medicines can't be separated, ideally can't be separated from these, from these therapeutic contexts. That's the thing. It's unlike something like Prozac, where, you can I mean, you can give that person that, take two, and call me in the morning. That's not an option with psychedelics. There is no take two and call me in the morning thing. I mean, it's not a
Right.
responsible way to use it. So roughly that's what it
And that's
is.
why you see like some of those venture capitalist companies trying to put patents on the therapeutic experience, like a soft couch. I just saw this last week. I don't know if you ran across that, but they're getting a kind of a lot of feedback. But to go back to your point with, I think it's important for Iowans to understand that plant medicines are mostly safe. Only very rarely, in very rare occasions, is it a bad situation where someone kind of doesn't return. Also, and only in rare occasions does someone reach full enlightenment in one experience, right? So it's kind of both. It's kind of those both ends of the spectrum, and everyone that's involved in the work. So the shamans and all the different legal facilities, they're doing a really strong assessment of mental health, medicines. There's even a pharmacist that's assessing individuals who are using SSRIs and mental health medications to make sure someone is safe. And to your point, where things don't go well is when there's not that support. So when it is not legalized, then this is when things don't go well. I've been able to help integrate folks across the Midwest, the United States, all the time, 100% of the time, because of that support, because I'm helping them with those spiritual experiences, psychedelic experiences, and integrate that into they're kind of like their news story, the narrative of, oh, I am part of nature, these peak experiences. And so that's why it's so important that we kind of make more access and kind of destigmatize it. Where people get into trouble is when there is not that support, that's missing, and it's not lined up with their mental health state. So that is very, very, very rarely the occasion.
Yeah, that's very important. That like with ayahuasca, I sometimes say it needs a vessel. Ayahuasca is a liquid. It will fill any vessel you put it in. And I'm speaking metaphorically about the vessel that you construct around the experience. So the same is true of psilocybin or any of these things. Context is everything. And as you pointed out, prohibition, well, for one thing, prohibition cuts you off from these opportunities, and it discourages responsible use, right? Because there are mushrooms all around, there's psychedelics all around, plenty of opportunities for people to take them without any preparation or insight or anything. And that's, you're absolutely right. When that happens is where you get into trouble, especially if these things should be approached respectfully, cautiously, thoughtfully.
So then on that note, I would like to just express gratitude for when it was introduced to me, that was made clear that, hey, recreation might be a side effect, but that is not really the primary focus here, that there is something deeper for you to get out of it. And not everyone had that introduction. Which is, again, one of the big things where we're just trying to respect nature, approach these things with humility, because this world is so intimidating. But this might be a fun question. I don't know if you've gotten this one before. In your experience, what has been the most irresponsible thing that either you've done or you've seen or someone have maybe done in this space? But I want to explore worst case scenarios or just any personal experiences on that note.
The worst possible thing that I've done.
Or just most irresponsible, not necessarily you, but anyone in this space that you've witnessed or might know about, and sort of like, wow, that was really human beings disrespecting this gift. I don't know. I just want to throw that out there.
Well, there's a lot of things that go on, because we're human beings, and we're inherently flawed because of that, and we're not morally perfect. I think the worst kinds of abuses I've seen draw from my experience with ayahuasca retreats in South America, which I've been organizing for some time and attended lots of them and so on. And I think the worst abuses is these things are very powerful spiritual technology. Essentially they're a powerful spiritual technology, and people come to these retreats with the intention of taking something that's going to totally disrupt their orientation to, their comfort zone. Essentially, you're going there, and just to get on the plane and go to South America to one of these things is a huge commitment before you even take any medicine. The problem is that in contexts where you have powerful spiritual technology, you also have power mad people. So I think most shamans, most curanderos, whether they're indigenous or whether they've learned their craft or whatever, are really sincere people who want to help people. They're motivated by that. They're not out to harm people. But then there is the rare person who is basically a sociopath, and you never know. They can't be trusted, and you need to be able to trust the practitioner, because they're putting you're deliberately surrendering. That's the whole point. You have to surrender. You have to let down your defenses. And if you're dealing with a sexual predator, for example, or other kinds of predators that are using it for power and not for healing, then that's a problem. And this is not something that happens only in psychedelics. This happens with any spiritual. There are plenty of gurus in the Eastern traditions that are, do the same thing. They talk a good line, and they're abusing women all over the place. And, it's, so this comes, psychedelics, if you're a bad person, psychedelics are not going to make you a good person. If you're a good person, it can help you to become a better person. and so it's that kind of abuses that I have observed, and that I think that's terrible, because this is your consciousness you're dealing with. This is the core of your being that you're opening up, and deliberately opening up to whatever may come. So anyone that comes along and says, well, this is a great chance for me to take advantage of that, I just think that's morally wrong, and that should be discouraged. I guess the other thing is, that's probably the main thing. But then again, taking this, not taking time to prepare, not approaching the medicine, responsibly, and realizing and acknowledging what a sacred and important thing it is, and acknowledging that by the way you approach it. I don't want to say that recreational use is always bad. People do use these things recreationally, and usually the outcomes are okay. They may not get what they would have gotten if they'd approach it in a more thoughtful way, but usually it's okay. But sometimes it goes bad, and again, it's the lack of education. Like, okay, so what if I mix this psilocybin with 2CB and MDMA and 5 or 6 beers?
Yeah.
Wow, you're really far out there.
Trouble here. and people do that because we all know how how crazy young men usually approach it. I've taken a lot of psychedelics in my day. As people say, I'm, some they used to, but they say, wow, you've taken all these things. You're a real psychedelic cowboy. No, I'm not. I am not taking it for that reason. I'm a very humble student in a way of the medicine. And like I say, I'm not one of these people who feels that they have to personally bioassay every molecular variation of some psychedelic. That's people. I'm glad some people do it, but I'm too old for that.
I guess I see it as like an outgrowth of this instant gratification aspect of the culture that people want their healing now, and it won't do the work for you, so to speak. I mean, there still is a lot of stuff that you need to bring to the table, a lot of willpower that you need to develop in yourself to go deep. And I think we just, as a culture, we've lost sight of that. No matter what, it's work, and nothing's going to do the work for you. It could bring you to the right place. So I don't know. That was just a thought form on that in terms of what we're seeing now.
That's exactly right. That's very profound. No one can have your psychedelic experience for you. That's the thing. It's an intensely individual thing. Everybody's experience is different. I mean, it may be similar to others, but it's your thing. It's kind of like nobody can be born for you. Nobody can die for you. Nobody can make love for you. These are things that an individual has to say, step up and say, only I can do this. And it's like, that's the thing with psychedelics. You have to step up and say, only I can have Jeff Shipley's psychedelic experience. That belongs to you. Also, I think one of the reasons that psychedelics are so attractive these days to lots of people is that, you know, as a culture, we've suffered, you know, a loss of meaning. There's a lot of people feel like meaning is rare. I think this is one reason why suicide rates are skyrocketing, all that, because people sense that there really is no meaning to life, you know, and if that really becomes ingrained, then you become depressed, and eventually you might reach a point where you say, well, what's the point? I'll just end it all. And lots of people do, not because they took psychedelics, but because the despair of our culture overcame them, and the psychedelics can, you know, the Johns Hopkins studies and others with this mystical experience, they have different ways of rating them and so on, but they rate them, or they can quantify people's personal reaction to the psychedelic. And they and in Roland Griffith's studies, some of the early studies, like 80% of the people said it was the single most meaningful experience of their lives, of their entire lives. And that's a huge number. And to say that, because this is what we lack in our culture. This is what the despair of our culture and our species really. And psychedelics can cut through that, and they can help you understand that even though the picture may be dark, there is meaning to life. You know, it helps you discover meaning in your own life. That's why often when you take psychedelics, for many people, it, you know, the importance of family, for example, the importance of children, the importance of the things you love really become front and center, you know, and you can reach a point where you realize, you know, with gratitude, how blessed we are, you know, and it's very easy to forget in the busyness of day-to-day life, you know, crushing your competitors and all that stuff that we do.
Well, so we spoke to meaning in this life, but I don't know, this might be a little bit far out, but I imagine you have some interesting insight onto the concept of life on the other side, because that's another thing that's been associated with these therapies is the end of life anxiety, and making sure that when people are passing through or passing away or crossing over, that they have a sense of completeness or just a serenity about that process.
Yes.
Would you be willing to speak to that at all?
Yes, exactly. I don't think that, you know, I don't think that psychedelics necessarily give you certainty that they, you know, that there is something after death, that there is an afterlife, although some of these experiences, especially at high doses, resemble the classic phenomenology of the near-death experience, you know, but you're not dying. And actually, the paradox is, and kind of the you know, the paradox is, or I don't know if that's the right word, but you can't have a near-death experience while you're dead. You have to be alive to have that experience, you know. So sometimes people say, well, you know, I took psychedelics and I got the insight that there is definitely a life after death, you know, and I don't have to be afraid of death anymore. I think it's good to have that discovery. We shouldn't be afraid of death, but I also have to remind those folks, remember, you know, you had that near death experience because you exist in a functioning body with a functioning brain that's capable of producing those kinds of experiences. That may well be something like that. There's reason to think that when you're dying, when you're in a state of advanced stress, and we assume that dying is advanced stress, the body can gin up lots of DMT and flood the brain with DMT. And that DMT and psilocybin are very similar in their effects.
Yes.
They're now finding out that DMT, it used to be all about the pineal gland, but that's kind of an old model. It seems that DMT is a neurotransmitter in the brain, just like serotonin, dopamine,
So
all these others.
that means it's much more ever present in our neurology. That means every human being is possessing within themselves a Schedule 1
Yes.
illegal substance.
Right.
Yes, and you should march yourself down to
We
the
already
police
have
station
it.
immediately and turn yourself in for possessing a controlled substance.
That might start solving the problem because I don't think they have enough jail space for everyone. And,
That's right.
but so these are big problems, and I guess this speaks to the overall pictures. We have laws on the books in the state of Iowa and the federal government of the United States that are basically saying everyone is this criminal possessor, that we are criminalizing our very existence as human beings. And so I guess I'm sitting here as a lawmaker listening to you answer these questions for the last half an hour. It sounds like there's no justification for criminalizing at least psilocybin to begin with, in that perhaps under the right clinical circumstances with the proper respect and humility, this could usher in a new golden age of health and healing to help reconfigure our conception of humanity to step forward in a bold new way of living and health and wellness. Is that a fair representation of what I'm hearing?
I think that's a fair representation. Yeah, it's, I mean, you know, we've had 50 years or more to realize that the prohibition model does not work.
Right.
People want to take drugs, they'll find a way to take
Right.
drugs. You know, all the prohibition in the world is not going to stop that. The answer is education. You know, you have to teach people or give people the opportunity to learn how to use these things properly when it comes to psychedelics. And as far as all the other so-called drugs that people use and abuse, kind of the same thing applies. You know, in some ways, I think that you know, what I've always said, you know, what I've always said in conversations about drug education, you know, which comes up once in a while, and almost all drug education, you know, courses that are offered in high school and junior high school and so on, the message is don't take drugs, you know, just don't do it, right? You tell that to a bunch of young people of that age and demographic, that's kind of like saying, don't have sex, you know, absolutely don't have sex. These are young people. Hey, they're gonna have sex, right? I mean, whether it's prohibited or not, or frowned upon or not. Same with drugs. I've always said the goal of drug education programs should not be about, it shouldn't be about don't use drugs. It should be, if you're gonna use drugs, if you make that choice, then learn how to use drugs. Well, this, of course, is heresy to suggest that people actually learn how to use drugs, because it will encourage drug use. Not necessarily. You know, they're going to do it no matter what. If they're going to do it, they may as well know what they're doing to minimize the harm and the danger. And they realize, you know, I mean, it's kind of like driving a car. Anybody can get in a car and drive around, but you're going to get in trouble unless you've learned how to do it. And it's the same thing, exactly. And that's important. That needs to change. I'm not one of these folks that say, they should not be regulated at all. I think
Mhm.
that's probably erring too far. I think they should be lightly regulated. And I think they should be regulated for things like, well, contaminants and purity and that sort of thing is obvious. And then people should be encouraged to educate themselves if they're going to use it. Maybe even to the point of, I mean, you'd have to, as legislators, you'd have to think about this, but maybe even to the point of getting some kind of a certification. I'm a licensed psychonaut, or something like that. I don't know, but
Do you provide those certifications?
no, I don't,
Oh,
and it wouldn't
okay.
mean anything anyway if I
It would
did.
mean more coming from you than the state of Iowa. But I know you've been very generous with your time. I just want to give Shannon the last word to close us up, or any other questions or final thoughts to just end on a really good note.
Oh, wow. So I hear you saying, we need to not be at war with nature and to kind of bring back some of these ceremonial rites and for education. To my point earlier too, is just matching the medicine up with your mental health state. I
Yes.
think that needs to be provided because there's some entheogens that are great for certain types of mental health conditions,
Right.
matching that up. And I love the point that you're making as far as, getting maybe a certificate to be a guide or a sitter, just someone that can provide that safe space, to provide that education, because that's really the missing piece. Because like you said, the war on drugs that started with Black communities, to put people in the school to prison pipeline, which we've seen for generations and generations. We need to have a new way to decriminalize nature so that we can be more at peace with purpose and meaning, and to be, especially as Iowans, we have a lot of farm fields here. We are very natural type of folks here. So I love all of your points. What do you think, as someone, as I'm a professional and clinician involved in the field, what should I be doing? How can I bring plant medicine to my community? What should I be focused on?
Well, I don't know of your specific community. I do think that the decrim movements are good. I mean, they are a step in the right direction,
Okay.
because what I would like in the first place, I mean, I don't want to get off on too much of a rant here, but the very idea that you can declare these organisms illegal
Right.
is absurd, in my opinion.
Well, and representative of the height of human arrogance that is going to lead to the destruction of the planet.
Right.
I mean,
Right,
we are kind of
exactly.
at extinction level event type things going on in humanity right now. And it is our own ignorance, our own arrogance, and we're just suffering under the weight of that, is my perspective. So please go on a rant, because it is
Well,
flabbergasting.
what I have begun to say in some contexts is I say that we should articulate a right to symbiosis. If you form an alliance, if you form a relationship with any of these plant medicines, in some ways, you're benefiting them and they're benefiting you. So that's kind of the definition of symbiosis. It doesn't have to be, any organism, like food plants, aromatic plants, all the plants that we value for different things are sort of like they are part of the network of relationships between organisms that you can call symbiosis. And I think to articulate the idea that people have a right to symbiosis is one part of that conversation, and the other side of it is, if these decrim movements are handled properly, what I would like ultimately to see, there are lots of places that operate that are, healing centers. They use psychedelics, but they're underground. They're under the radar.
Right.
The decrim movements enable, if they're successful in different communities, then these underground retreat centers can out themselves. They can come into the light. They're not prohibited, and then they can really be a positive influence on communities, because centers like that, you don't say this is a psychedelic retreat center. You don't pitch them that way. You say, this is a healing center. This doesn't look like a clinic. It looks like a spa. And it looks like a place where you could go and say, take a weekend, go there, do a little yoga, get some massage, maybe some nutritional counseling, just a whole spectrum of things. And on the menu is psychedelic therapy that's available if you want it. And I think that's the way that you integrate psychedelics into communities, is by you center them on these healing centers, which are not exclusively about psychedelics. They're about wellness, and they recognize that psychedelics are a component of this wellness, how to help us become better, more conscious, more compassionate, and all that. You know, the war on drugs is a war on people, you know, and it always is. I mean, it's not the substances. The substances are simply what they are, you know. They have the properties they have. And, you know, I'm very fond of saying that technology itself, and these drugs are kind of a technology, you know, the moral quality does not reside in the technology. The moral quality comes from the way we use these things. You know, morality, decency, goodness comes from the human heart and nowhere else. You know, so you can use these things for, you know, very beneficial purposes and very bad purposes. You know, if your agenda is to control someone or brainwash them, you can use these things and ask the CIA. They know all about it.
Right.
Well, I guess on that note, well, thank you. You've been very generous with your time today. Sounds like we have a lot of work to do on our end, and I think people are ready to build off the research and everything you've done over your career. And certainly for my community, I mean, they're not waiting for permission. People are going ahead on their own. In terms of regulations concerned, it seems very self-regulating, where I think the message has gone out that these are very powerful, worthy of respect. So hopefully in my advocacy, I can continue stressing those themes to ensure that when we're having these conversations, we're doing it in the right way.
Yeah, the word is getting out, and people like you and your friend there, who I've forgotten your name already.
Shannon, yes.
What is it?
Shannon.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I'm terrible with names. All right, so good. Well, I'll link you to this recording, and
okay, fantastic.
You can download it, and yeah, if you want to keep me posted, if you want to have another conversation, I'm totally open to it.
Yes, sir. So just so you know, we're hoping to move forward with the meeting next week at March 3rd. So say some prayers for that day. And then, yeah, I'm hoping to get some good clips edited out of here, you know, find those good 2 to 3 minute juicy segments that we can kind of get out there. And we're going to be in front of lawmakers. So we're driving the discussion forward, and we're just so thankful for everything you've done over many decades now.
What is the meeting? What is the session?
Oh, so it's House File 459, which just deletes the word psilocybin and psilocin from the Iowa Criminal Code. And I think that the decriminalization is important, just because I know a lot of people are wanting to experiment with the microdosing application. Right. So, you know, I am trying to author different bills with like a medical framework, but that takes a lot of time. That would be a lot of effort. Like, I think, and I don't know, I want to speak too grossly or next, but I mean, at this point in time when, you know, there is so much stress in the environment, and God only knows what's going to happen next week. I mean, we just got to let the mushrooms do the work on their own, and just all the human beings, is we have to, I don't know what I'm trying to say here, but I mean, I think we'll just rip the Band-Aid off, so to speak, and just unleash this powerful technology, and those who are attuned with, you know, humility, truth, and hopefully for those who maybe aren't as geared in, you know, they get their butts kicked a couple times and maybe they learn the lesson. Maybe the mushrooms are more forgiving on some people than others.
Yes.
So, yeah, that's the meeting is 459. It's just a straight decriminalization. Getting the meeting was a kind of a 2-year project in of itself. Politics moves very slowly. But it is just fascinating. I mean, how you know, the 50 years of research that exists now, where it really feels like it is on the cutting edge because people need it. So it's an evolutionary
need it.
necessity at this
Exactly.
point.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, good luck. I know I know Iowa's a conservative state, and I think there's a lot of people that don't want to hear about this, but that don't let that stop you. They need to hear about it.
Well, again, I think the pain and the suffering, you know, like I said, but that's right. And we have to just make sure we're crafting the message, and those with ears will listen. And on my part, just making sure that I am the most capable, respectful spokesperson, so to speak. But honestly, the mushrooms, and I guess just so you know, this is, I say, the biggest political advocacy obstacle that I'm seeing is people who've had wonderful experiences, but just aren't comfortable talking about it publicly. Kind of like I did to start the call. So
Right,
seems to be one of those invisible obstacles of like, hey, please just shout this out at the rooftop so everyone can hear you, because look at how much benefit it created for you. We don't need to be shy about this. Honestly, I mean, anyway, that's just a whole nother conversation. We've been trying to interface with our local law enforcement, county attorneys. If you're not causing problems, no one's really going to care. So just be responsible,
exactly.
be discreet.
And
Yeah.
under the right circumstances, they're not a problem. And
Exactly.
actually, at the end of the day, people benefit from this experience. So on the political side, they're better citizens.
Mhm.
Better for the state of Iowa. And then
You
just
could always
how
pitch that to them.
Oh, actually, last question, because one of the big issues in the state of Iowa is the mental health of our children and adolescents, and just how, their psyches are really torn with the rise of social media. And do you think there are safe applications for young adults, or I guess what would
Yes,
you be
absolutely.
the barriers?
Absolutely.
Okay.
There
All
are, again, it just takes thoughtfulness and the right structuring. But for example, in the ayahuasca retreats that I facilitated, on a few occasions, people have come with their teenager, young adult children, and often they've come because there's, there are problems in the family dynamic. There are problems, the kind of problems that crop up when kids get older and start to think for themselves. And I have seen incredible healing in those families, families that were falling apart. Everybody's at each other's throat. The man and wife are thinking of getting divorced and so on. And I've just seen, incredible transformations. They go away and they really benefit from this kind of thing. Have to be extra careful because it is young people, but inherently these things are not harmful, in indigenous societies. I mean, every society is different, but you might start taking something like peyote or ayahuasca as young as 12, and I'm not necessarily advocating that, but it's all about your own individual maturity, and some young people at 12 are as mature as other people at 20, and other people, so again, it's just individual. It's the individual situation. You have to think about what's appropriate, but you can
Awesome.
tell, and that's why this, this pre-session therapeutic sessions are so important, especially if a group situation like that. But
Well, there's clearly so much more to talk about. We're going to do our best to have these conversations with all the people of Iowa and hopefully do justice to all the good work that you and so many others have done. And just thank you for your time today, and looking forward to getting this clip edited up and distributed to the people.
okay,
Yeah.
well, it's a pleasure to talk to you. You may have a whole list of people you're speaking with, but if not, or even if you do, I have other suggestions you could interface with if you want to.
Wonderful. Perfect. Looking forward to following up and doing all this important work, because I think this is a decade-long project at least. You know how the long fight goes. So we'll definitely stay in touch, and hopefully we can make you proud, Dennis.
Okay, wonderful.
Right.
Let me know so I can take a look if it's online or anything.
Oh yeah. We'll definitely stay in touch. Just get me that recording over. We'll get to work on it. We'll be in touch, and like I said, hopefully we can do good work for you.
I'll get it right to you right away. Okay.
Thank you, Dennis. Take it easy now.
All right. Thank you. Have a good afternoon. Yeah.
You too.
Ciao, ciao.